With all of the speculation about Joe Biden's future, it's important to remember what is at stake in this election, what this is all about, why we're even talking about this. I mean, this week, the Supreme Court just expanded the role of presidential immunity beyond what has ever been in the past, ever. And right now, Donald Trump and all of his acolytes are plotting to push through a radical expansion of executive power so they can do what they want to do without any consequences. And we know that because they wrote it all down. Of course they did. It's literally online. As we discussed many times on the show, the right-wing think tank, the Heritage Foundation, gathered hundreds of conservative organizations and laid out a roadmap for a second Trump term known as Project 2025. And I want you to listen to something the president of the Heritage Foundation said this week in response to that Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity that also happened. Here's Kevin Roberts.
In spite of all this nonsense from the left, we are going to win. We're in the process of taking this country back. We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
I mean, the Second American Revolution. Now, that rhetoric is clearly dangerous. It's pretty deranged. But it also sparked some new attention, not attention they wanted necessarily, on this very unpopular and extreme second-term plan of theirs, which Donald Trump, of all people, seemed to pick up on. He said, quote, "I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who's behind it. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. Anything they do, I wish them luck, but I have nothing to do with them." I mean, I know nothing about it. I just disagree with it. And also, I wish them luck. None of that makes sense altogether, I'll just say. But Trump is basically trying to pretend he is totally removed from Project 2025, which is awkward for a range of reasons, including this.
Heritage Foundation president, somebody else doing an unbelievable job. He's bringing it back to levels it's never seen. Dr. Kevin Roberts. Kevin, thank you, Kevin.
He's doing an unbelievable job. Kevin Roberts is the same guy you saw in the earlier clip. Now, remember, a huge contingency of MAGA world is also promoting this plan, like, say, Trump ally Steve Bannon, a guy who's apparently in contact with Trump at all hours of the day, including during interviews like this one you see on the screen, and who literally waved the 900-page plan around in an interview that he did last week with ABC before heading off to prison. See, many of Project 2025 contributors and advisors had very formal roles in the Trump administration or campaign. And importantly, these are people who are also expected to be in Trump's White House again if he wins. Some of those names you might recognize. Others you may just be learning about, like, say, Russ Vought, the former director of the Office of Management and Budget, who wrote the plan's chapter on the Executive Office of the President, a pretty important chapter. He's believed to also be a leading contender to be Trump's chief of staff, as in the most powerful advisor in the White House. In the meantime, Vought is overseeing the overhaul of the Republican Party platform. That's right. This same guy was appointed by the RNC in the Trump campaign as the director for 2024 RNC Platform Committee. So, yeah, I'm sure Trump knows nothing about these plans. Just some kind of coincidence that someone who might be his chief of staff is orchestrating the development of many of these exact plans. Just a coincidence. So, again, people close to Trump wrote Project 2025. People close to him promote Project 2025. And don't forget, this plan is largely consistent, almost all of it, with everything Trump himself talks about openly. What Trump says out loud at rallies about immigration, about dismantling of federal agencies, about the expansion of presidential power, and a litany of other right-wing priorities is in complete lockstep with Project 2025. So the man could read a public sentiment to some degree. We'll give him that. And he may recognize that public sentiment around Project 2025 is becoming quite toxic. It doesn't matter what you call it or what Trump says about it, what he knows or doesn't know about it, or who he wishes well, because these plans are Donald Trump's plans. And no one should forget that. Neil Katyal is the former acting U.S. Solicitor General. Andrew Weissmann is the former general counsel at the FBI, and both join me now. Neil, I want to start with you. I mean, we all watched this, we digested it, but how does the Supreme Court's immunity decision enhance, I was just talking about this in the last block, the dangers of what Trump and Republicans are clearly trying to achieve through Project 2025?
Well, Jen, at the top of the show, you called this a green light to abuse executive power, and that's exactly right. It's a shocking shocking decision. Even executive power hawks like Sai Prakash, who's a scholar who clerked for Justice Clarence Thomas, agree that the decision is wrong. And you can see just how wrong the decision is just by looking at one paragraph, and that helps answer your question. One paragraph in the Chief Justice's 6-3 decision, joined only by the Republican-appointed justices, said that when Donald Trump pressured Justice Department officials to impugn the integrity of the 2020 election to the point where they even threatened to resign, he said that the court said that was an official act. That is patently absurd. The Constitution cuts the president explicitly out of election disputes for the best of reasons. The president has the most self-interest in that. So if that's an official act and the criminal law can't touch that, then there's very little that the president can't do. Just slap the label official act on it and do whatever he wants. And it connects up so much to what you're saying about Project 2025, because the check on one of the main checks on a president breaking the law or having crazy policy is the expert career staff. I saw that firsthand when I was at the Justice Department, non-political people who just tell you what it is. And the whole thing of Project 2025 is to fire all those people and replace them with Trump loyalists. That is not the Constitution. It's not been the government since the Pendleton Act of 1883. Very, very dangerous.
Yeah, that is such an important, they are the heart and soul of government and government service, and virtually every agency, but especially agencies like the Department of Justice and the Defense Department, the State Department. Let me ask you, I mean, and Andrew, I don't want you to make this joyful if it's not meant to be joyful, but are there any checks? I mean, Neil referenced the Project 2025. They want to dismantle the checks that would be in the system, right? And obviously, the Supreme Court decision gave Trump a green light if he is elected. Are there checks left in the system? Would there be in the system if he were to get a second term?
I'm going to start with sort of dour news to underscore what Neil said, which is that not only can the president have absolute criminal immunity with respect to his interactions with the Department of Justice, but that includes even creating sham investigations. Of course, that is what was at issue here, where they said that is now off limits. So just imagine the DOJ under President Trump has a sham investigation of journalists, legal analysts, judges, witnesses, jurors, political opponents, all absolutely immune. Then extend that to no criminal liability if they were to say just go after Black and brown communities, after certain religious groups. That is otherwise illegal. Or if they said we're going to go after, or actually not go after, crimes committed against people who have had abortions or doctors who have performed abortions. All of that, the court has taken off the table in terms of criminal liability, and that is just the Department of Justice. We haven't even gone down the road of the Department of Defense and what it would mean for the military. I cannot underscore enough what Neil is saying. If to go back to sort of what this election is about, this is so much now because of what the court has done. The court is on the ballot, but also having a leader who shows self-restraint and character is going to be critical given what the Supreme Court has just done.
No question. And thank you both for being so direct about it. I think it's important for people to understand. Let me ask you quickly, Neil, before we go, just about some developments in the classified documents case, because they've asked, Trump's lawyers in the classified documents case have asked for a stay after the Supreme Court ruling. Is there a real chance, I mean, that criminal cases against Trump will be brushed away with this ruling? That's what they want. But what's the shot at that?
Well, not in the reality-based community, but of course what's going on in Florida is starting to deviate massively from that. Remember, the Supreme Court's decision was just about acts Donald Trump took while president, and much of the allegations against him with respect to Mar-a-Lago and stealing classified documents has to do with stuff he did after he left office. So approaching this as a fair-minded observer, which is of course an asterisk here, I don't think that it would stop that Mar-a-Lago case from happening because it's post-presidential conduct, but it remains to be seen what this judge will do.
Neil Katyal and Andrew Weissmann, always love talking to you. Thank you both so much for joining me this Okay. As I've talked about before, I've worked on 3 presidential campaigns, and every campaign, even the ones that win, have bad days and even bad months. But rarely, if ever, has there been such a loud call by the supporters of a nominee to drop out. Now, as we've been discussing, those calls are far from universal. It's also not at all clear what the preferred alternative path is, which is very important. But all of the speculation also means the people inside the Biden campaign right now are juggling a lot. It's their job to support Joe Biden. And during what I bet has been the most difficult period of the campaign to date, to tell the story of their plan for the path forward. So over the course of the last week, they announced on Friday that they will spend $50 million in advertising this month. They also announced that June was their best fundraising month of the campaign, which included the $30 million raised in the days immediately following the debate. At the same time, my guess is the campaign is still fielding lots of calls, questions, and concerns from elected officials, from donors, and from campaign staffers about the path forward. And one of the main people having those hard conversations, both internally with the team and externally with supporters, is Quentin Fowlkes. He's the principal deputy campaign manager for the Biden-Harris campaign, and he joins me now. First of all, thank you for being here. As I just noted, you have a lot on your plate in addition to helping run the campaign. Let me just start with the president's appearance at the African-American church in the suburbs of, I think, outside of Philadelphia today. I thought that was a very interesting choice. It seemed to send the message to me that he still has a strong base of support. There were cheers at moments. I couldn't tell if there were boos. I think they were mainly cheers. Is that something we can expect to see more of, like going into churches like that, African-American churches, to kind of continue to build that support?
Absolutely. It's part of our core strategy. It has been since the outset of this campaign. You saw it very early on when the president went to South Carolina and visited Mother Emanuel. It's been a stalwart of who President Biden is in his entire political career, and it's what we're going to continue to do. We know we have to mobilize communities of color, different constituencies, and the campaign for us is still going. We're still forging ahead because Joe Biden is the nominee, and we've got to do everything we can to communicate with voters where they are. And for a lot of voters, that is Sunday in church, and that's what President Biden did today.
Yeah, I think people would like to see. We were just talking about this a lot more of that moving forward. Let me ask you, I mean, the president did his first big sit-down interview with George Stephanopoulos on Friday. It played Friday evening. I want to play you a clip of it that I talked about a little bit this morning. Let's play that, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
And if you stay in and Trump is elected and everything you're warning about comes to pass, how will you feel in January?
I feel as long as I gave it my all and I did the goodest job as I know I can do. That's what this is about.
I mean, you and I both know it's about so much more than that. And I know that Joe Biden believes it's more than that. But there are a lot of people, Adam Schiff this morning, who are upset about him saying that. So what do you say to them?
I think that in the heat of the moment, everything gets taken a little bit out of context. I think what the president is saying—
Well, that was the full context.
Yeah, well, I'm saying that the way it's being interpreted, I think that the president is saying nobody's going to work harder than he has to defeat Donald Trump. He understands the stakes of this election. I mean, take a look back at why the president ran the first time. He saw Charlottesville, he saw Trump and what he was doing to this country, and he got in the race. This isn't about Joe Biden thinking that he is the only person that can beat Donald Trump. This is the fact that Joe Biden believes deeply that he has a better vision for this country, and that is what we are doing on this campaign to make sure that we're drawing the contrast between those two visions. And President Biden does not believe that this is about him. And our whole campaign apparatus since the moment that we have announced has been about democracy, freedom, the stakes of this election, and what it means for real Americans at their kitchen tables when they're making those hard decisions about what bills to pay, childcare. That's what this race is about, and that's where the president's focus remains. And I think what he was saying, and I know what he meant, is the fact that nobody's going to work harder than him to defeat Donald Trump.
Let me ask you about your job is really hard. I just want to acknowledge, for anybody who has confusion about that, you're helping run the campaign. You're also a role model to staff when you're in a leadership position. First, let me ask you about conversations you've been having with donors, elected officials, others from the outside, because you're a person who would take a lot of that. And we know they're going on. It is not business as usual. Yeah. How much of your time is that consuming? What are you hearing from people generally? Because we see what's in the reporting, but what are you hearing, honestly, from people who are calling?
Look, I think that we hear that there's broad support for the president. People know that President Biden has had their back in the work that he's been doing. People want reassurance. And I think that that's okay to say. The president knows that that's okay to say, that he knows he has to get out there and reassure people. And so part of my job is doing that. But make no mistake about it, this campaign is in a strong position, and we're in a strong position because of voters. You mentioned our staff. Our staff draws energy from voters. Voters are the people who elect presidents. There's only one campaign that is building an apparatus with field offices, ours at nearly 300 with staff, ours at over 1,000 across the battleground states. And this isn't just staff in Wilmington, Delaware. This is staff across the country in the battleground states talking to voters. And so President Biden gets his energy from voters. Our campaign gets our energy and enthusiasm for voters. And the people that we've hired on staff deeply believe in President Biden and Vice President Harris's vision for the country. And that's why they're on this campaign.
It's also quite bonding when you're being hit from a lot from the outside.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about Vice President Harris. And just I will reiterate very clearly, because I know you will, President Biden has made no indication he's not planning to be the nominee. But on the conversation around Vice President Harris, Donna Brazile told NBC News, quote, if somebody wants to go past or look past the Vice President of the United States and find someone else, they would still have to come past some of us. Black women are still the backbone of the party. That's unquestionable, but she's essentially saying that it has to be Harris if it's not Biden. Do you agree?
First of all, it is Biden. But Vice President Harris has been a great partner to President Biden, and President Biden knows that. President Biden is going to win re-election to be the president of the United States, and Vice President Harris is going to get a second term as vice president. And the reason that is President Biden picked her, but because before she was vice president, she had a long history of standing up to the banks and going after mortgages, lenders who were being predatory. And since she has been vice president, she's been on the front lines talking about abortion and reproductive freedom. She's been across the country. You saw her go on the ground in Tennessee. We've seen her go to Munich to make the case against Putin, the fact that he was committing war crimes. We've seen her be a partner and an ally to President Biden, and she looks forward to continuing to do that. And I do just want to make one point. Vice President Harris's worth isn't wrapped up in the fact that she's black or that she's a woman.
True.
She has been an incredibly strong vice president and an ally. She has the experience, and that is where her focus remains, on being a partner to President Biden, as she has been for every single accomplishment that they've gotten done over the past 3.5 years.
So though it is Biden, if it were Harris, I know it's not right now, does she get the talents of Quentin Fowlkes working for her?
I'm not even going to engage in any hypothetical situations like that. She has the talents of Quentin Fowlkes working for her right now because she is on the ticket with President Biden.
Fair enough. Quentin Fowlkes, you have a hard job. Thank you for doing what you're doing. It's important, and I know people look up to you and rely on you, too. Thank you for being here as well.
Thank you.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.